My name is Bill Holman. I'm the President and CEO of Sagepoint. It is my pleasure to welcome all of you here today to our second community education event. This is something that, as the area's only nonprofit provider, we feel very strongly about. We look at ourselves not only as a resource within our campuses of providing care, providing a quality of life, but also as a resource for the community. And I'm very pleased to see, frankly, a lot of faces that I don't recognize. It's nice to see some friendly faces, but in my position, it's great to see some that we don't recognize, and we welcome you to Sagepoint. Sagepoint is an organization that I'm very proud of. I've been here for some time, but we're kind of at a very interesting point in our history. The organization, formerly known as Charles County Nursing Home, Charles County Nursing and Rehabilitation Center, CCNRC Family of Care, had quite an identity crisis. It had a great reputation, still continues to do that, but it had an identity crisis, and we looked to solve that last year with the rebranding effort, which brought Sagepoint to this organization. And we're very proud of that name and gave a great deal of care to work with a group to come up with it, because it really denotes what we want to be. And part of that is what we're doing tonight, and that's providing expert advice, whether it's from our internal staff or bringing in experts as Dr. Rabins, who I'll introduce you here to in a moment. But there are different ways that we want to continue to be the facilitator in improving the lives of older adults in Southern Maryland. So I'm hopeful that many of you will get that from this and look forward to the other offerings that we have down the road. For those of you who don't know, I'm just going to take a quick minute and give you a little brief information about Sagepoint. Last year we cared for over 500 individuals in our multi-settings. We have a skilled nursing center here, we have a short-term rehabilitation program, but we also have an assisted living program. We have an adult day program that serves individuals that need help during the day. And most recently, we opened a small household model community that serves 12 individuals who have various forms of dementia and Alzheimer's right next door on our campus. And we're very privileged to be able to call that our premier setting, and worked very hard and with some very well-respected individuals in our organization, in this county, and in the state to put this model together. But my reason for sharing that is so that you understand our commitment to providing the highest state-of-the-art services that we can possibly put together here. We continue to have a focus on quality. There's no question about it. The quality of care here is very good, and that will continue to be our main focus, but we're now adding to our focus quality of life through person-centered care. That is becoming ingrained in our culture and in everything that we do. We recognize that we need to take a holistic approach when it comes to caring for individuals, particularly those in our models with dementia and Alzheimer's. There's no question when we look at the demographics and study what's going to be happening, particularly in the Southern Maryland area, that there's going to be a big need for this type of care. Demographics that we look at say within 10 years there's going to be an 85% increase in those age 65 and above. Overlay that with an expected 28% increase in the state of Maryland of those who will be impacted with dementia and Alzheimer's. You start to see how the numbers are going to present challenges. But at Sagepoint, we are committed to stepping up and being a resource to the community. Some of the things that we have on our books to improve the level of service that we're able to offer are expansion efforts. Very shortly, you'll see some expansion going on in this campus within the next couple of weeks that will result in a 30-room, let me emphasize, private room short-term rehabilitation center. We recognize that individuals now want private rooms, and we're committed to bringing that to the residents of Charles County and those that we're going to be serving. In addition, we're going to be breaking ground in the spring on a new assisted living building over on Washington Avenue that will allow us to provide 60 private rooms for the individuals that we serve, and there will be a focus on Alzheimer's and dementia memory care as well, mirroring the service that we provide next door here. And I think most importantly, we understand that the care needs are changing and the setting that people want to have care is changing as well. And while we provide a great level of care on our campuses, we understand and support the need for older adults to be able to stay in their homes as long as they can. And we are going to be an organization that's going to help facilitate that. So I would ask you to look for things happening in the Maryland Independent, some of our social media announcements, because we will be bringing home care assistance services to the community in the very, very near future. And I think that is something that this organization is very proud of, to be able to say, we are going to be the resource, the trusted caregiver in all of the settings, all with a focus on improving the lives of older adults. So that's our commitment to the folks in Southern Maryland. Now, that's enough about us. Let's talk about our featured speaker this evening. We are very pleased to have with us best-selling author, great colleague, and friend to our organization. Dr. Peter Rabins has been very kind to us in helping guide us through some very difficult situations that ultimately ended in the best care possible for the individual. His connections with Johns Hopkins allowed us to use their resources to help our residents down here in Charles County. He has also been kind enough to allow us to use a quality of life indicator that he developed so that we can measure the outcomes of our programs and have actual data to say we are improving the lives of those people that we're serving. Our focus on the assets versus the deficits is showing this in real hard numbers. And those of you who know I'm a numbers guy can appreciate that we love to have data to be able to show that. But with that said, Dr. Rabins is a professor and founding director of the Division of Geriatric Psychiatry in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. He focused his career on the study of psychiatric disorders in the elderly. His current research focuses on the effectiveness of current therapies for Alzheimer's disease, the development of measures of quality of life in persons with Alzheimer's disease, the care of patients with late-stage dementia, and autism in the elderly. So we're very pleased to be able to present to you someone who is known internationally for his work and believes in the same quality of care, quality of life, asset-focused care that we believe in. So I want to encourage you to ask some questions. This is an open forum. Dr. Rabins is going to speak, but we want this to be about you. What do you want to know? He's here to answer all the questions you have. So again, on behalf of our residents, our employees, and our board, I welcome you to Sagepoint, and thank you for coming out tonight. So with that, Dr. Rabins, it's all yours.
So I want to thank Mr. Holman for inviting me and all of you for coming out tonight. What I thought I would do is talk for maybe 25 or 30 minutes at the most, and then leave at least a good half hour for questions. But I don't mind being interrupted, so if I say something that isn't clear, raise your hand and I'll do my best to try to clarify it. What I thought I would talk about is what I like to call the 3 revolutions of Alzheimer's disease. Now, the first one begins more than 100 years ago, back in 1906, when Dr. Alzheimer, so he was a person and he was a doctor, performed an autopsy on a lady who he had first examined back in 1901 when she was 51 years of age. At the time, he was working at the main psychiatric hospital in Frankfurt, Germany. For a few months, she had been accusing her husband of having an affair, which he swore wasn't true, and no matter what he would try to say or reason, she would become upset and agitated, and things were just very difficult. The other thing that had happened was that for about 6 months, she had been having trouble cleaning the house and cooking, two things that she'd always enjoyed and been very good at. So she was actually admitted to the hospital there in 1901 and never left. Died 5 years later. And Dr. Alzheimer, who was actually a very famous brain doctor at the time and had made several discoveries already, when he examined her brain under the microscope, he saw two microscopic abnormal findings scattered all throughout her brain. And he knew that no one else had ever seen this before. These are called plaques and tangles. But of course, they named the disease after the doctor, not the patient. So that's why we call it Alzheimer's disease. But of course, this was a young woman. So she died when she was 56. She probably had her problems start at age 49 or 50. So he thought this was a very rare disease, although he knew, and he wrote this, that what he saw under the microscope was somewhat similar to people who were senile. Okay. Now, that's back in 1906. And so for the first half of the last century, people thought Alzheimer's disease was a very rare illness. They knew it caused dementia, and I'll define that in a second. But, of course, becoming forgetful when you're 50 is very rare. So what do we mean by the word dementia and Alzheimer's? Because people get confused about those, and it's hard to be clear. Dementia is a general, it's a kind of an umbrella term, and it refers to any disease that starts in adulthood, affects two or more aspects of thinking, so the number 2 is important here, and does not affect how alert a person is. So people with dementia are as awake and alert as we are, but they have impairments in at least 2 different aspects of thinking. So that's a very broad definition. And in fact, there are at least 80 diseases that can cause dementia. And some are very rare, but you've heard of some. Lupus can cause dementia. Multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's disease. So it's a very long list of diseases that we know can affect the brain, and they all cause those symptoms of dementia, an impairment in 2 or more aspects of thinking beginning in adulthood, but not affecting alertness. Okay. So that was even known back in 1900. And so Alzheimer's disease, defined by those microscopic changes, was known as thought to be a very rare cause of dementia. Then in the late 1950s and early 1960s, a doctor in England, Martin Roth, he had been studying senility. And he did what are called epidemiologic studies. He went out in several cities in England and just sort of counted how many people had memory trouble in the community. And at the time, he found that about 5% of people over 65 were forgetful. But he also started working with a pathologist to look at what happens in the brains of people who are senile. Now, I'm sure everyone here has heard that word senility, right? But in fact, it's disappeared. We don't even use it any longer. Kind of amazing. Because when Dr. Roth and his colleagues looked under the microscope, and they finally published this in 1967, so, about 50 years ago, to everyone's surprise, they found the same amount of hardening of the arteries in normal old people and in the forgetful old people. So that was a big surprise, because everyone said, oh, becoming forgetful, that's hardening of the arteries. And everyone just kind of took that as obvious, but couldn't be true if you found the same amount in normal people and forgetful people. The bigger surprise was the difference between the two groups. The forgetful people had those plaques and tangles in their brain that Dr. Alzheimer had described way back in 1906. The normal people had very few or none. So all of a sudden, in the late 1960s, people said, wow, what we thought was normal aging, senility, because the word senile just means old. It's not getting old. It's a disease, Alzheimer's disease, that happens to be common in old people. So that's the first revolution. Reconceptualizing senility from just, this is what happens when you get old, to no, it's caused by diseases. And that was a really dramatic change in how people thought about senility. So that led right to the second and third revolutions. The second one is the research revolution. Because once it became clear that this was a disease, people started to say, well, then we should be able to study it the way we do any other disease. Right? Now, I don't know if this has occurred to you, but why did it take 60 years? Right? Dr. Alzheimer described it in 1906. Dr. Roth made this sort of discovery in 1967, 68, 60 years later. Why did it take that long? Because, remember, Dr. Alzheimer looked under the microscope. That's all Dr. Roth did. The reason it took that long is nobody was interested. Everyone just assumed, we know senility is old age, it's what happens to you, who cares? But once people said, no, it looks like it's a disease, then scientists started to think about, well, then we ought to be able to study it. And where would you start if you were going to study Alzheimer's disease? Well, one place to start would be the brain. It's a brain disease. And people started to look very carefully at those plaques and tangles that Dr. Alzheimer had described way back in 1906. And one of the things they found was that the plaque lesion, again, these are very teeny microscopic abnormalities that are seen all throughout the brain, was made up of a particular protein called the amyloid protein, or beta amyloid. And amazingly, we all have this protein in our brain in every single neuron or nerve cell in the brain. So the protein is normal. Okay, so then the question is, well, if it's a normal protein, why does it accumulate in some people and cause dementia? And that's been a major focus of research for the last 50 years. Okay. Now, until yesterday, I'll come back to that at the end, the leading theory of Alzheimer's disease has been that it's a garbage disposal disease. What does that mean? Okay. Well, we all have, here's our nerve cell. We all have this protein in the membrane of that nerve cell. And by the way, after 50 years, we have no idea what it does. So that's been a hard thing to, but turns out it's a very long protein. And when cells die, the protein just gets plopped in the brain, and that's not good because it would fill up the brain. But fortunately, we all have in our brain enzymes that cut the protein into pieces that can then be removed from the brain. So that's what happens normally. Cells die throughout life, and many proteins get sort of dumped into the brain, and then the body removes them. That's just a natural process. But it turns out that this amyloid protein is so big, and that there are several enzymes, and it depends on where you cut that protein. If you cut the protein into a 40 amino acid piece, the body can remove it. But if another enzyme is the predominant one and cuts it into a 42 amino acid point, so it's a very teeny difference, the body can no longer remove it. So over many years, the thought is the garbage, the 42 piece, is building up in the brain. We now know that that process starts at least 20 years before the first symptom. So the idea is this piece of protein gets plopped in your brain. And then after a while, it starts to stick to the other 42 pieces. And over time, it's a little bit like a snowball rolling down a hill. It starts accumulating more and more and more of these protein pieces to the point where the body says, what is that snowball doing in the brain? It shouldn't be there. And it attacks it just the way it would an infection or any other thing that shouldn't be there. Do you ever think about you get a splinter in your finger? How does your body know that that splinter isn't you, right? It attacks it. The reason you get pus there is because white blood cells come and they attack the splinter to kill the germs on it. So our body knows what's foreign and what's us. It normally doesn't attack what's normal and attacks the foreign. But at some point, it looks like this snowball, even though it's a normal protein from our cells, the body thinks it's foreign and starts to attack it. And when it attacks it, it secretes chemicals that kill other brain cells. So again, it's like a snowball. You kill one cell, and then that attracts these cells, and then the poisons come, and then it kills two more, and then those two kill more. So over 10, 15, 20 years, many brain cells are dying. And so there's been a tremendous effort to try to find drugs that will treat or prevent Alzheimer's, and the main focus has been on this 42 amino acid protein, either stopping the body from making it in the first place, or stopping the body from attacking it as if it's foreign, or trying to remove it from the brain. And so far, every one of those trials hasn't worked. Now, maybe the theory's wrong. By the way, there are lots of seats up here. Feel free to come up if you want. I'm going to fall asleep standing up, and that would be embarrassing, but you don't have to. Okay. So whether the theory's wrong or they just haven't developed the right way to attack it, that's not clear. Right? But that's been the leading theory, and there are now more than 100 drugs in development to try to treat Alzheimer's. That's pretty amazing. Right? So again, if all that research comes out of this sort of discovery in the late 1950s that Alzheimer's disease is common, it's the most common cause of dementia, and it's a disease. It's not just a normal process. So that was very important. But the third revolution was equally important, because once it became clear that this was a disease or a group of diseases, people started to say, well, then we should be able to care for people with this illness just like we care for other sick people. Right? And again, what did they do? Well, they started to look at people with the disease more carefully. And as they did that, they came to see that the average person with Alzheimer's disease lives about 10 years from very first symptom to death. And if you look at the symptoms, you can sort of see a pattern. Now, every disease has patterns. The facts of life, it's not that they're unimportant, but that's not the most important thing in life. The most important thing in life is how we relate to each other. And we do partly do that through information and facts and all that, but you can fold that into a conversation. And that helps us, because what do you say to someone who can't remember what you just talked about an hour ago? It's not easy to have a conversation. I mean, people who work here know that they're having the same conversation 20 times a day. That's one of the challenges of caring for people with dementia as a family member at home or as a professional. But if you can, get out of that and start talking about the ravens or the weather. Boy, it really rained. Did you hear that thunder? It's really, I heard it rain 3 inches in Baltimore. And I remember back when the tornado came through town. And boy, if they can remember that, which was really a strong memory, you can have a conversation about the tornado. Well, maybe you did that yesterday or a week ago, but you're relating to them through that conversation. And it's finding that, I think, is much more important than, I never know the date anymore anyways. That's why I have it on my watch with this big magnifier so I can see the darn thing.
Especially when you retire.
Yeah, exactly. Yes?
The way you answered the question, I think, gave me an aha moment on the question I was going to ask. And sharing information with others, friends and people I've met, family members who have dementia or Alzheimer's, they say that they, in one of the stages, they become very paranoid. And like that's one of the trends or something like that. And when you said to the one young lady, when we try to get them to remember something, that they won't accept, it's like a lie to them. Like they think you're lying to them. And so now, to me, when my mom gets paranoid, it's because everybody's always trying to tell her something that now she thinks is a lie.
Yeah.
Now she's paranoid. She don't believe anybody anymore. And that might be why.
That's part of it. So here's how a doctor would think about that. So doctors do what's called a differential diagnosis, right? Somebody comes in and I have chest pain. So in the back of my mind is a list. What are all the things that cause chest pain? Now, heart attacks right at the top of the list, because if someone's having a heart attack, you got to get things going very quickly. But there are other reasons you can have a broken rib, or you can have pneumonia. All kinds of things can cause chest pain. Same thing is true for paranoia, even in people with dementia. So sometimes it's because they're misinterpreting things. Sometimes it's because, again, as you sort of said, they know you shouldn't be telling them something. I mean, they feel that you shouldn't be telling them something, or they feel you're telling it to them as if they're a child, and that's insulting, so they get angry. But remember, Dr. Alzheimer's patient had this belief that her husband was having an affair. And it turns out that these kinds of false ideas that we call delusions are common in people with all kinds of brain injuries. But there, the false idea is always the same. Okay? So if your mom said, you're stealing my money, and said that every day, that might be a delusion. And then but you still try to figure out, okay, what can you do about it? Can you give her a little bit of money? Can we give her a checkbook with $20 in the account? There are things that sometimes make people feel better, but often it's because they were worried about their money, so they hid it under the mattress, and then when they went to look for their purse or their wallet, they couldn't find it, and so they figured, oh yeah, it's the nurse who stole my money, or my daughter, so sometimes there's a logical explanation. Sometimes it comes from the brain disease. And across all these problems, there's a kind of a trial and error approach to it. It's really hard to say what is going to work for any one person. So you try one thing, you try to ignore it, you try to change the subject, you try to relate it to something positive in the past or whatever. And for certain people, one thing works, and for other people, that's the skill. And if you look at the people who work here and are really good, and there are many of them, at interacting with residents, it's because they can figure out what helps this person feel good and what helps that person feel good. Because, I didn't mention this, but one of the real challenging symptoms is in the middle stage, people have trouble, as I mentioned, perceiving the world. So sometimes they say things like, you're not my daughter, you're not my mother, because they can no longer recognize faces. Sometimes people will be in their own home and they'll say, this isn't my house. Right? Now, how do we know that that's just not forgetting? Well, sometimes to someone who says, this isn't my house, you can say, well, describe your house to me. And they can say, well, it's red brick and it has green shutters and the mailbox is painted yellow and there's a big bush on one side, and you can take them out front and say, look, there's the address 402 and there's the yellow mailbox and the green shutters, and they'll look and you say, I know my house and this isn't it. Now they just told you what it looks like, so they have the memory. But what happens in this middle stage of Alzheimer's disease for many people is their brain cannot put together what they do know with what they're actually perceiving. So it doesn't help to argue and say, but Mama, you're my mother, I'm your oldest daughter, or you've lived here for 50 years. Because, again, to them, the brain can't make that connection. So arguing or trying to correct them. So what often happens in a facility like this or any place is people say, take me home, I want to go home. And we all empathize with that because being home is important. But chances are very good when you take that person home, they're going to say, what are you doing? This isn't my house. Because they can't recognize, even where they've lived their whole lives. It's one of the devastating symptoms. So again, sometimes you realize there's not logic to the symptom. You can't figure it out. Again, it's much better to try to find a way around it and try to find something in common that you can talk about.
important is it to have
Okay, how important is it to have a diagnosis? And well, I think it's very important and not so important. I think first, saying that it's a disease means that it's not normal life. And you know, when it starts, the tricky thing about dementia is it's so subtle when it starts that sometimes it is very hard to know, are these the normal subtle changes of aging, or is this a disease? And that is a hard period. So I think it is useful, number one, to know there's a sickness present explaining some of these strange things and not just somebody being ornery. I think that helps us. Number two, about 1% of people with dementia have a treatable disease. So thyroid, there's a long list of treatable conditions. They're rare. But in my career, I have probably had 50 patients who people thought they had Alzheimer's, and it was medication. It was hydrocephalus. It was low thyroid, low vitamin B12. So being evaluated, even though it's rare, you would hate to miss the 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000. So that's the second reason. And then the third reason is when you get a particular diagnosis, it gives you some information. So those stages that I described, that's Alzheimer's disease. The dementia of Parkinson's disease is very different. The dementia of vascular disease is very different because, and it's different in each person because it depends where are the strokes. So someone can have a perfectly normal memory. That's why the definition of dementia doesn't say abnormal memory. Your memory can be normal. But if you have strokes in the part of the brain that affect judgment or perception or math or whatever, you can be very impaired even though your memory is relatively good. So having a diagnosis you can look in the 36-hour day or online or whatever and find out what happens in the dementia of Parkinson's, what happens in Lewy body dementia, that sort of thing. So I think those are the three reasons that it's helpful. On the other hand, the principles of care are the same across all these diseases. Right? So it does help, again, to say, well, this person can't recognize that this is a familiar place, and it can help us empathize. Imagine sitting in this room right now and not knowing kind of where you are, right? And because your memory's bad, you don't know that I'm going to stop in 5 or 10 minutes, and you're sitting there thinking, this jerk could be talking for hours, and I'm stuck in the middle of the row, and if I get up, I'm going to trip on that guy's feet. And this is, in part, the world of people with Alzheimer's. They don't have a future because memory tells us what's coming. Because they don't perceive the world kind of the way that we do, they don't have, it's hard to figure out, what am I doing in this room with all these people? It's hard to know what the future is, and you don't have a past, so you're kind of living in the present, right in the moment. And that's particular for Alzheimer's disease. So again, understanding, I think, is somewhat useful. But look, there are times when I don't know I know someone has dementia, and I don't know what the cause of it is. Or I'm wrong, I've made mistakes in diagnosis. So the principles are generally the same across all these diseases, and in that way, the right diagnosis today doesn't matter because it's not treatable.
How do you get a right diagnosis?
I'm sorry?
Where do you go to get a good diagnosis?
Well, I really think that, first, it's a very common illness, and so primary care doctors should be able to make the diagnosis. Not everyone can, but so first, I think you go to your primary care doctor. If you're not satisfied or the doctor can't figure it out or it's complicated or it's unusual, they should send you to a specialist. And, most communities, there's neurologists, there are some geriatricians. I don't know if there are any geriatricians or geriatric psychiatrists in the area. So you can ask around, call the Alzheimer Association. They'll tell you who are the doctors that are, more prone. You're lucky, there are Alzheimer programs in Washington and Baltimore. And there are people who have specialty memory programs. But I would call the Alzheimer, if you're really not sure, I'd ask around or call the Alzheimer Association and find out who's good.
Well, I was concerned. I went to my GP, and she asked me a few questions. Why do you think you may be getting this? And it's like, okay, well, here's a prescription. Try this, see if this helps.
Yeah.
How will I know if it helps if you can't cure it? How do I know I'm getting better?
Well, the two things. So when I take care of people with dementia, all doctors do this, there's a little memory test that we do. So we give it before and after the medicine. And we rely a lot on sometimes what they say because they notice an improvement, but also their family members. So sometimes family members will say, gee, Dad's much more able to remember what we did last week, or more able to come up with the names of kids, or, he was having trouble using a knife for a couple weeks, but I was surprised the other day, now he's able to do that. So sometimes other people can notice improvements. I think the most important thing is to focus on the positive parts of life. And, it's frustrating not to have a good memory, but memory's not the most important thing in life.
They were talking about coconut oil. Did you see that?
Yeah, there are a couple of things. So, any disease where you don't know the treatment or cure, there are all kinds of things. Coconut oil, there are books. If you read them, this woman's husband took coconut oil for 3 weeks and was cured. I have had scores of patients take it, and not one of them was 1 iota better. So it's not even a placebo, I don't think. Well, who knows? We'll see in the long run, but there's never been a good study. 30 years ago, people were worried that aluminum caused Alzheimer's disease because it turned out that in Toronto and 1 or 2 other places, people who died of Alzheimer's disease had a lot of aluminum in their brain. But in a lot of other cities, they didn't. And when they looked further, they realized that there's a very high amount of aluminum in the water in Toronto. And because the brain is injured by the Alzheimer's, it collected more aluminum. So that doesn't, there are just ideas like that are hard to disprove. Mm-hmm.
Are you familiar with that study that they're trying to do nationwide? Like I'm sure Hopkins is a part of it in Baltimore, but I know my wife went to the one in Georgetown, and it was one that they're trying to get seniors somewhere in the age range of 60 and above to be a part of the Alzheimer's study, and they basically bring you in and your significant other or a family member, because they don't want just the person who is being tested. They want someone else to find out how truthful you are being with the questions they're going to ask you and everything. But the nice thing is, everything that they do is free. It doesn't cost a dime out of the person who comes in. Do you support that study? Because it sounds like it would be wonderful in that respect.
Yeah, absolutely.
We read about is most seniors don't want to find out. So they really don't want either don't know about it, or if they do, a lot of them don't want to know about it anyway, because they don't want to be. They're afraid to find out about it.
No, well, all those things are true. In the end, research is going to be the only way that we're going to figure out how to prevent this and how to treat it. So I'm a strong believer in research. I don't think everybody should do it because not everyone wants to, but it's one way to give to society. And I think it's everything that we have learned about the disease really has come from studying people who had it. There are mouse models and all kinds of things, and billions of dollars have gone into studying those mouse models. And it's probably the reason we don't know anything more than we did 20 years ago. Because mice don't get Alzheimer's disease unless you genetically engineer it, so we have to study people.
Because what this woman was asking regarding food or how to they do all the tests.
Yeah, so Georgetown would be one.
And it's free. It doesn't cost you a dime.
Yeah. Deficiency of vitamin B12 can also cause dementia. The good thing about B12 is there are very few medicines that are totally safe. Vitamin B12 is pretty much totally safe because if you take too much of it, you just urinate it out. But most people don't need it. If you eat a regular diet, taking extra doesn't help.
I've also taken gabapentin because of some and they say you can't go off it's cold turkey, you get depressed and stuff like that. So, I'm only taking a small dose of like 400 milligrams. And I just wondered if that has anything to do with dementia, but any drugs.
Well, it doesn't cause it.
It doesn't cause it, good. Okay, thank you.
But there are a lot of medicines that can impair memory. So, particularly sleeping pills, but it's a huge range of drugs. So again, one of the things that when anyone's having memory trouble, a doctor who's knowledgeable has to go over every medicine. And that's actually the most common cause of treatable memory impairment are prescribed drugs.
What if it's not catch soon enough? What if somebody has this deficiency for a long period of time and it's not caught soon enough?
Yeah, vitamin deficiency or thyroid.
We
The longer it goes, the less reversible it is, unfortunately. Okay, maybe one more question, then we should stop. Yeah.
About the stages, do they go cleanly from one
No.
stage to the other?
That's just kind of again, it's like saying, if you have breast cancer, this is your future. That's wrong. You shouldn't say that. So these are just kind of general averages, but just to help, it's a way to help understand how the disease progresses. Some people, though, never lose the ability to speak. Other people become totally mute, cannot talk at all or understand. So there's tremendous variability.
He's having trouble swallowing, but yet he can still, and with memory problems, but, he still dresses and has an issue with the swallowing.
Well,
What is it that causes the problem?
then again, I can't comment on any individual person, but when something is way out of what's expected, you got to look for a different reason. So if somebody's dressing and bathing and speaking pretty normally and able to get around, and they're having trouble swallowing, it's not the dementia causing the swallowing. That's why you need a good doctor who can say, wait a minute, this doesn't fit, So you should look into that, probably.
Please join me in a hand for Dr. Rabins. I don't think there's any question we all got a great deal of value out of this. I want to thank a few people for putting this together. Most importantly, my team, many of them who don't want to sit down and are hiding in the back there, for putting all of this together. Very gracious thank you to Bailey's Party Rentals who provided this stage and wonderful equipment to us. This donation really, I think, added a lot to our presentation here, so we thank them as well. A couple of things we have going on supporting the Alzheimer's Association. We believe very important work is being done, and we're doing our part to support it. We're going to be out with the Alzheimer's Walk on September 26th. If anybody would like to join us and get some of that exercise that Dr. Rabins talked about, we'd love to have you, and we'll give you a free t-shirt at the same time. We've got some information available on all of our services I talked about earlier at our table over there if anybody would like to learn a little bit more about Sagepoint. And finally, we were able to video this talk, and we're going to make this available for education purposes, so you will be able to refer back to this through our website. So if there's something that you thought you might not have gotten enough of and wanted to check it out again, I'd encourage you to take a look. It will be up there very shortly. So with that, I want to thank all of you for supporting the Sagepoint Education Series. Please keep a lookout in the future for other conversations that we're going to have, and thank you for the great questions. It was wonderful. So please enjoy the rest of your evening and help yourself to our refreshments here. Thank you.